Oh, got it.
Well, we are back. I am Andrew Langer. So glad you can join us. Listen, as I just said to our guest, this is really the best one of the best parts of my job, and this is even better because it's the intersection of two things that I love. Talking to people who've been into space. I've interviewed a number of astronauts, as you all know, but also talking to people that I went to high school with. We've had a number of those guests on over the years. Here's a great intersection. Joining me today is Glen de Vries. He was one of the Blue Origin astronauts to go up just a couple of weeks ago. We're so glad he can join us. He is also, wait, Glenn, let me make sure I pull up your bio here to make sure I have it. Glenn founded Medidata Solutions in 1999. They were acquired by Dassault Systems. In 2019, he's on right. You're the vice chair of life sciences and healthcare there. We're going to talk about your philanthropy. You're going to talk about your time at Carnegie Mellon. But and you're a trustee at Carnegie Mellon as well, and what the founder of Waterorg. Also, at Captain Clinical on Twitter, you should definitely follow him there. So Glenn, I mean, listen, I was absolutely thrilled when our friend Jesse Lunenpack messaged me on Facebook. He says, "You're not going to believe this. Glenn is going up in the Blue Origin spaceship." But let's start here because, so you all know, Glenn and I went to high school together. We weren't the same year. He was a year behind me. We were part of the same friend group. Have you always been a space nut? Were you a space nut when you were a kid?
Yeah, actually, Jesse and I sat next to each other in the front center of every science class, I think, at Fieldston. And not just Jesse, but people who I knew from grade school came out of the woodwork and kind of emailed me and found me. And people were saying, you have been talking about this your whole life. I can't believe you're actually going.
Did you? I mean, did you? You know, obviously you didn't. Well, we're going to talk about your career, but I mean, this was a winding path because this is like a bank shot. So, like, when I was a kid, I was a space nut. Neil Armstrong was my hero. I found that I didn't have the aptitude for math, which we all know. Just spending time trying to listen to me do math on the air, I don't have that. But I also was too tall. So it was. But I mean, so I didn't get to go. But I mean, so did you, when you went to Carnegie Mellon, did you think that this was someplace you were going to go, or?
I know I did. I mean, and I definitely spent, I think, my whole life kind of fantasizing, if I can use the word, about going to space. I even today, in my bedroom, I have lamps that are next to the side of my bed that kind of look a little bit like jet engines. You wouldn't know that unless I told you that. And it's literally like Star Wars sheets for a 49-year-old. In fact, just a huge fast forward, like, it feels really weird to go to bed and actually think about being in space, not just fantasizing about going. But that was my life. Like, I always thought about that. But I, as you know, I was like the consummate science nerd, right?
Yes.
So it didn't matter if it was physics or chemistry or biology. And professionally, I wound up going down the biology route and winding up in healthcare and life sciences. But it's not like the space part ever went away. My interest went from, molecules to cosmology, and engineering was always a passion. I always thought spaceships and planes were the coolest thing. So yeah, it was always there.
Did you have that space shuttle? I want to say it was called the Space Shuttle Construction Book.
I think the book you're thinking about, maybe the one I had was the Space Shuttle Operators Manual.
That's it. Yes, that's exactly it.
And it has literally, there's a copy in the other room. It has excerpts from NASA procedure manuals and diagrams of all of the panels. And I would pore over that book for hours.
Yeah,
looking at it, thinking about putting on a spacesuit. I mean, every little last detail was something that I just loved.
So. No, I was just going to say, because I dressed up as Neil Armstrong for a fifth grade. I had to read a biography. We had to read a biography of an explorer. I chose Neil Armstrong, dressed as Neil Armstrong for the presentation. I'm sure you went down that road as well.
That's a pretty good one. Yeah, I definitely had a lot of space themed in my life.
So okay. So let's talk about. We're going to talk about your journey in a minute, because I know my listeners and viewers want to talk about your entrepreneurship journey. But before we get to all that, I mean, let's talk about how this particular trip came about. Sure. You reached out to, was it the Blue Origin? You heard that they were looking for folks. Well, how did this happen?
Yeah, honestly, I probably about 9 years ago, 9.5 years ago, because of Virgin Galactic, I realized like people could go to space. Like this
Yes.
might actually become a thing, and so I was interested since then, and I've been really interested. I've been lucky enough in my career that I was in a position where I thought, oh, like not only is this starting to become possible when I was watching Blue Origin, who was making tremendous progress, but like I might actually be able to afford to do this too. And so, Blue Origin did an auction. I participated in the auction, which I'm sure put me on their kind of list of people who were serious. And you have to talk to Blue Origin about the selection process. I actually don't know what it really was, but if you look at people like Chris Bosshausen and myself, who were two of the first paying customers, I think they're looking for people who really could advocate for why this was so important and hopefully bring this kind of message to the world. And so I got to be in the lucky Venn diagram place of that. And when they called and said, "Would you like to go?" It took me about a millisecond.
Yes, I understand. It's funny you say that because, and I'm sorry if you can hear my dog in the background. Okay. So because this issue of private space flight is one that I've been involved in my policy world. About 10 years ago, I spoke up on Capitol Hill at the founding of something called the Competitive Space Task Force.
I saw your presentation.
Oh, there you go. Thank you. Oh, wow. That blows me away. And so this idea, right, that we have government-sponsored space flight, just in the same way that we have government-sponsored exploration of the high seas, gives rise to this idea of private space exploration. Obviously, it's there's quite a bit at stake here, but then you have these issues of but really it's all about economies of scale and all of that. But talk about that. I'm sorry.
So I do have now a couple decades of experience in life sciences, and
yes,
I honestly think I've seen this movie before, and in a good way, right? So if we were sitting around waiting for governments to create cures for rare diseases, cancers, vaccines, whatever you're waiting for. Imagine if we were just waiting for governments to get that done.
Yes.
And I think that the answer would probably, unfortunately, be that we'd be waiting a really long time, if not forever, for a lot of things. In life sciences, you've got regulators, and I am always the first in my professional pursuits to come to the defense of regulators. Sometimes people are like, "Oh, they're slowing things down." No, these are people who, of course, every bunch of apples has maybe a bad one in there too, but in general, people who are at the FDA care about public safety and protecting the public. So you've got this layer of regulators. Then you've got academic institutions and publicly funded organizations like the NIH, the National Cancer Institute, universities that work together, and they create this kind of academic and intellectual fabric that underlies the life sciences industry. Then you've got Pfizer and Johnson & Johnson and Moderna and Sanofi and all these companies, large and small, this industry stack on top. And I also am not going to pretend that it always works perfectly.
Sure.
But it works well. And you get this virtuous cycle of innovation that is supported by the regulators, supported by this academic fabric, but fueled largely by an industry.
Yes.
If you think about space, there's the FAA and there's NASA, and I'm being very US-centric in this, but you can use this in any country. And what we didn't have for the last 60 years, and I shouldn't say last 60 years because these companies have been working for 10, 20 years now, but you've got SpaceX, and you've got Blue Origin, and you've got Virgin Galactic, and you've got Axiom, and you've got companies large and small, everything from big pharma to biotech conceptually, that has made a stack that looks just like life sciences.
Sure.
And so I feel like that is going to be this now innovation engine. And so, look, let me go back to private space travel for a second.
Absolutely.
It is a huge privilege for personally to be able to go do this and have this experience. But I am telling you that part of the privilege is realizing that we are at the beginning of this space industry taking off. Let me put it in math terms that hopefully are okay.
No, please go right ahead. No, it's fine.
So Yuri Gagarin, Alan Shepard, right? First couple of people in space. This is about 60 years ago.
Yeah.
I think my official space number is the 582nd person in space.
Nice.
It took us 60 years
to
get about 600 people in space. if you look at Blue Origin, SpaceX, the Russian Space Agency, China, everybody who's going to put people in space, Virgin Galactic will probably get a couple more in space next year. We're probably going to put more than 100 people in space in 2022.
Wow.
We'll do a sixth of what took 60 years in a year. So this is the year that people go to space. And I think this is about, the privilege to me is about equity and access. Yeah, I had a privilege of going early, but I think, did we ever go on the, I think it was maybe different grades, like the circle line together. I remember.
I missed that.
There's this, I'm sure your listeners are everywhere, but like there's this boat that goes around Manhattan.
And let me just say, it's something I've been dying to get my family on various trips to New York, but we just haven't done it. Go ahead.
See every neighborhood, and I think they send kids on it to get like perspective on the city they live in when you're from here. I don't think it's crazy to think that high school kids at some point will get to go on space trips and get the perspective that I got. And space technology is going to result in so many innovations that are going to be good for space and for the planet. So that's the privilege. That's the exciting thing.
And it's interesting because you talk about this, and one of the informal mottos of this, and may become an official motto down the road, is substance matters. So I appreciate the deep dive into all this, because, you know, it's like Howard Hughes saying, you know, his goal in getting advanced aircraft technology so that it could fly above the clouds, you know, so you could get more people. His goal was to get more people in the air. This is what this kind of innovation does. Go ahead. You were.
Yeah, no, I think we look at this the same way.
All right, let me shift gears a little bit, because I want to talk, you know, I wasn't going to ask you about this, but it's very clear you're thinking about these things. I sat in, this has got to be 3-4 years ago. One of the benefits of living where I do now is we are a stone's throw away from NASA Langley. And so occasionally get local speakers who'll talk about this. I had a guy come out talking about the Mars mission. And I got very frustrated with what he was saying, because he was talking about using essentially, you know, solid rocket fuel engines to get us to Mars, and the amount of time. And I sat here and thought, well, wait a minute. You know, if getting into space, you know, and a lot of these journeys are about weight, right? You know, you're
all that way,
physics of all of it. You're right, but going to Mars is also about time, right? Yeah. Every day you're in space, because we don't have suspended animation technology. Every day you're in space requires food and water. It exposes you to the various risks of things that might perforate a spacecraft, or illness, or equipment breaking down. And so I wanted to get your thoughts about this. We really need, if we're serious about going to Mars, we need to have a real leap in innovation in terms of propulsion, don't we?
Well, we need a leap in innovation. A lot of things. Propulsion is definitely one of them.
Yeah.
We need to think about how we take care of human biology.
Please. Yes.
You know, it's just an interesting kind of topic. A friend of mine in the space industry who works on manufacturing ideas. So getting people to be able to build things in space that maybe you couldn't build on Earth. Made a really interesting point to me about evolution, and what is the one constant in the evolution of all life on Earth. It's not temperature, it's not pressure, the atmospheric pressure has changed, it's certainly not the composition of the oceans or the air, it's 1G. It is.
Oh yeah, sure.
Gravity of Earth. And like we're going to have to think about, and people are doing this research, like how we keep ourselves and food and things in space. And it may very well be that we learn about ways to grow food, or I'm a huge supporter of this thing, water.org.
Yes, I want to talk to you about that.
Which is trying to make sure that like the 1 out of 9 people, which is a lot of people who don't have access to water, like get it? Well, there's no faucets in space.
Yes.
So you have to think there's a leap in reclaiming and purifying water and managing food. That's the kind of thing that I really feel like is going to benefit life on Earth. It's going to solve problems here. And so I think people sometimes, and I love like foundational research, right? We were talking, I'm like a science nerd.
Yeah.
But not everybody realizes that quantum physics leads to microchips getting smaller, which leads to your iPhone, which leads to social networks. Like these technologies have emerging behaviors that come out of them.
Right.
Space is going to be no different. That's where I think some of the benefits.
Right. I mean, and of course, we have the precedent already, right? We know that our space program of the 1960s and into the early 1970s led to a number of massively innovative technologies. Yeah. And of course, the irony is, we now have so many more times the computing power in our smartphones than they did to get us to the moon.
I just have to give you such a good one on that
Yeah,
topic.
please.
I do all this stuff in medical research and wearing sensors. The sensors that tell you how many steps you took, those are the piezoelectric sensors that were developed for the Apollo program to look at the attitude of those ships. And now they're so small, and they help us figure out who's fallen at home and needs to an ambulance. Can be like, again, you got to think in these large time frames, and it becomes really exciting.
Glen, true story. I have in my car. I got a new car, a new used car back in the spring. It's a Toyota FJ Cruiser, and one of the things that I got was a replica Apollo capsule switch set that I could customize. And I don't know if you're familiar with what happened if you about the Apollo 12 mission. They got hit by lightning, and there's a SC to aux switch. So I have that in my car now. So
that's awesome.
Sort of the level of my nerdness. Before we move on to the trip, let's talk a little bit about water.org, because it's one of those things that a lot of people don't understand. Obviously, there are a lot of environmental issues that are out there. I don't want to get into a political debate about climate. But to me, the work of Bjorn Lomborg, who's a Swedish environmental scientist, he surveyed scientists around the world. Access to clean water is, I think, the most pressing environmental problem that's out there. So let's talk about the work of water.org and what you guys are doing.
Well, so I really think, and again, I'm just such a huge supporter of water.org because we clearly agree about that. Yeah. And by the way, it's not a political debate.
No.
As long as you don't talk about why. But the answer is, this is a problem we have to solve.
Yes.
And I think what water.org realizes is that not only is this a problem we have to solve, but solving it actually creates, almost like what I was saying about science, these emerging benefits. And we should think about not just pure charity, but charity that fuels industry to solve them. So water.org is really interested and has been hugely successful in doing things like microloans to communities.
I love it.
That then can drill wells. And you take a community where maybe, and this is actually a true story from somebody from water.org. They met a young girl who had spent hours a day getting clean water for her family, walking to get it.
Yeah.
Now you solve that problem of access to water. What have you also created? You've created 3 hours a day for this young girl to go to school, and she wants to become a nurse and move to a city and create more GDP and health in the country that she's in. Like, these emerging things, when you deal with the bottom levels of Maslow's hierarchy of needs.
Absolutely.
And water and food, again, these are things that we are going to solve as we reach out of the atmosphere too. Like, that's what excites me. And when you find people who understand that innovation in industry can actually be the ally of doing good things in the world, that gets me fired up. And that's why I love water.
It's funny because the folks, I've done a lot of work with William and Mary's Global Research Institute, used to be called the Institute for the Theory and Practice of International Relations, and they're using, they're deep thinkers, which is great. They're doing a lot on blockchain and blockchain solutions to global problems, but sort of talking about these issues of microloans and how that could be just massively impactful. Anyway, we may have to get water.org and the GRI together. Let's go back to the space thing for a minute. Okay. We'll come back to water later on. So you get accepted. What's the process like? I mean, we want to get to the point where you're going up, and again, I want to be cognizant of your time, but what's the process like once you get accepted to the day you're going to go up?
So there's just a couple days of training that you have to go through to go on this Blue Origin flight. And look, Bill Shatner did it. He's 90. Yeah. By the way, Bill is in great shape for 90.
We all wish we could be in that level shape when we're 90.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. But I also think the fact that we in the last flight, Wally Funk, it was 82 when she went. Like, wow. We can send people who are not the astronauts that you think of in the right stuff, who have done every little physical thing. Because I actually, aviation has become a hobby of mine.
Oh, that's right. Yeah, you're a private pilot.
So I've done zero G stuff. I actually do a ton with zero G. Actually, also kind of interesting. Like they just did a flight where they took people who were blind and deaf and disabled and differently abled and put them in the zero G plane. And
That's wild.
Some of these things around access, people don't always connect. But I've done some zero G training with them. I've done some high G stuff. I understand how to communicate in an aviation or aerospace context. So I think I was really prepared.
Sure.
But the training is about really understanding the mission, understanding the craft. You sit in a simulator. If you saw any of the interviews that we did, it looks like there's the capsule behind us. It's not the real capsule. It's a perfect engineering of the capsule. So you figure out all your motions getting in and out of the seat. You figure out and you bond with the other people you're going to be up there with, and you figure out your plan together. Like we all were very focused about using the time to look out the window.
Yeah.
What you would imagine.
Sure.
But actually, Bill, William Shatner was.
Yeah, I get it. Bill is fine.
It's confusing to me that I refuse to refer to William Shatner as Bill sometimes, but
I get it.
But my friend Bill
Sure.
suggested, like when we were at the very top of our orbit, we decided we'd do it at apogee. We would stop looking at the windows individually, and we'd make sure that we had like a moment of camaraderie.
Yay.
It was such a good idea. Like we had such a kind of human experience too. So you kind of think about your plans and get ready, and that's the couple days, leading up to the actual launch.
Sure.
Making sure you know what you're doing, and you can spend every last microsecond getting everything you possibly can out of the experience.
Wow. Yeah. And that's just, I'm just sort of sitting here. I know wow is an understatement in all of this. I want to, we'll go here first. So, folks, Glenn and I had a friend in high school named Gabe Weiner. He was a year ahead of me, 2 years ahead of Glenn, who was, right, Glenn, the ultimate Star Trek buff. I mean, ultimate Star Trek buff. In fact, true story, he had tickets to the New York premiere of Star Trek IV. This dates both of us. And he had a group trivia contest to see who he was going to take. I lost miserably. But so did you, I mean, was there a moment where you thought, or do you think now, I mean, boy, what do you think Gabe Weiner would have said? How would he have reacted to you going into space with Shatner?
So besides being a huge Trekkie,
yes,
Gabe was also like a fantastic technologist.
Yes,
I think I learned my first Unix shell commands from Gabe Weiner, hanging out playing with AUX Apple Unix on at his place after school. And
sure,
I honestly think that he would have loved the idea of getting to know the guy who played Captain Kirk.
Yes,
but I also think what he would have really appreciated is this transition of like something that was portrayed in science fiction becoming real, becoming science fact. And I think the more people identify is probably the wrong word, but have that kind of science fiction inner core where they love that, which I certainly do, and then they see something like this happen, they realize that stuff that is dreams, whether it's curing a disease that nobody thought you could cure, or putting people to actually, like normal people, to go up into space. The imagination of these things is important because it inspires people for it to be real. And I hope that 55 years, Bill has been playing Captain.
Sure.
Can you think of all the people who now can get inspired by that?
Yes.
It's amazing that I hope that becomes a virtuous cycle.
And you think about this, right, where we were just talking about in terms of the 82-year-old who went into space as well, and this idea of differently abled people being able to go into space. This is right about sort of democratizing it, making it accessible to more and more people. And as we know that age expectancy is skewing upward. We are going to be, we know, right? They've said, I think the world's first 150-year-old has probably been born already. I mean, you're in life sciences. You can talk about this.
Think about it this way. Again, simple math, but I actually went and looked, we're close enough in age. We can both use this rounding to decent fractions. There are twice as many people on Earth now as there were when you and I were born. Like,
Wow.
that's crazy to think about. And I mean this in a biological way, not a political way. At the end of the day, we are a colony organism. I don't think termites wake up and go, wow, it's great to be part of this colony. They wake up and they say, hey, I'm going to go off to my job moving sand, right? And so there is, I think, this kind of greater humanity. I think if we were writing a science fiction book, we'd call it like the light of humankind.
Yeah.
There's a thing that we are all part of. And we have to think about keeping that in an environment where we're healthy and happy. Again, not in a political way. I'll just tell you, when you look at Earth from space, that really visceral sense of the word home, like you feel that. And it looks small and fragile in a way that we need to turn as much of it into a game preserve as possible. So Blue Origin has a mission statement that is getting millions of people to live and work in space for the benefit of Earth. And I have my own addendum to that, which is getting millions of people to live and work in space for the benefit of Earth, the way humanity wants to live on Earth, right? Paving the planet is not going to feel good.
Yeah.
Limiting the number of people that children people can have is not going to feel good. And our termite colony, I think, has eaten through the log, and maybe we ate through the log behind the log. And being able to reach outside of the zero-sum game of what's enclosed in our atmosphere and discovering technologies that will benefit us with the stuff on Earth, and getting manufacturing that might be damaging here or just not nice here out of the atmosphere, and finding materials that we need, rare earth metals and hydrogen oxide. Like, these things are going to be really important to keep that humanity thing, that civilization thriving.
We have to remember that pollution is waste, right? Ultimately. And the more you can reduce waste, the better off everything is, and the better off the bottom line is, and finding ways to use that waste in innovative ways. And I appreciate this idea. We have to be a prosperous society to be an innovative society. So
and if we're going to live in the kind of abundance that results in everybody being able to have the most fulfilling, happy life possible, that's also like the Waterorg stuff, and why I do a ton of stuff in education. We need to get to that bottom levels of the hierarchy of needs of food and water and shelter, and then the ability for people to learn. And
Glenn, dare I say it, that it's a Roddenberry-esque vision of the future. And I mean that in a good way. All right, so let's talk about this. So, okay, the day of the launch comes. You and Jesse Lunenpack go to the launch complex. You brought a couple of people with you, didn't you?
Yeah, I brought it. Yeah, so it's kind of like a litany of people who are close to me and my personal journey to get there in science. Actually, JB Zimmerman was there.
Oh my God! Wait. That's why. So folks, JB was large and in charge. He was a couple of years ahead of me, more than his brother was in Glenn's class. JB was
who I was like best friends with since pre-kindergarten.
So I was talking about him the other day because I was talking about my daughter was looking at Columbia, and I was talking about playing laser tag with JB Zimmerman on the Columbia University campus, which, if you think about the level of insanity, these were the black laser tag guns running around the Columbia campus in the 80s.
Yeah, it was a different time.
That's exactly right. And the idea was we'd play until we got kicked off campus, which was usually in the second game or so. That's why. But the point is, folks, JB Zimmerman, always into engineering, always had the cheapest. I mean, literally would not pay more than $50 for a car, and had this crappy car that he'd outfitted with like these racing seatbelts. Just a neat guy. Anyway, that's so wild. So JB Zimmerman,
and a great technologist,
exactly,
and actually a pilot now as well. So somebody who loves space and aerospace. And so Jesse, JB. People who I've met along the way, my closest friends in New York City, my business partner, Tarek, who I have spent 22 years sharing an office with. It's part of the Medidata story. My girlfriend, Leah, was there. Like, seeing somebody smiling at you and giving your friends a hug after you were off the planet. I even for 10 minutes, I'm telling you, it's like seeing the Earth from space. Just different perspective,
because your mind, new eyes.
Yeah. It was really, really special to have all my friends there.
All right, so you're strapped in. So talk about the flight.
So yeah, I'm strapped in as the countdown clock, because you have it in front of you, like keeps losing digits. I'm more and more excited. Like we go from like 10 minutes to 9:59, and we go from like 1 minute to 59 seconds. And I, I was I was trying to be as in the moment as possible, but there are definitely moments I was like, wow, this is really happening. I'm out to like leave the planet. And the main engine start, and my seat was right next to the tower, and you start to see the tower turning yellow and orange and red. And it was actually part of the flight that I was not intellectually prepared for.
Okay.
I was ready for what I was going to do looking out at the planet. And honestly, credit to the way Blue Origin has thought about this journey. Like you're sitting next to this giant window the whole time. I don't think there's another ship like that.
No.
And you start moving slowly. Obviously, you're under tremendous acceleration, and everything's human scale. You can see cactus, you can see bolts, on the tower. And then you go through these scales, which you kind of recognize, like you start to see agricultural patterns and hills. And there was this frontal system that I could see, like a line of clouds.
Yeah.
And then you keep accelerating, you're still going faster and faster and faster. And the angles, though, your sense of speed, your visual sense of speed is declining.
Sure.
Your physical speed is going up, and just the visual drop away of Earth and seeing the flat horizon. You don't see Earth like this, but you begin to see the curve of Earth.
Yeah.
And that trip up, it was like being in one of those educational or sometimes in a movie, like they keep something, but that's you.
Sure.
And it was just extraordinary.
So the Earth's not flat. I want to be really clear about this.
Okay, I can as a scientist, I can confirm that the Earth at least has a bump.
Okay, that's good. Right, it's just where you are. It's like a pimple.
That's all I saw.
A massive zit. Yes, got it.
It's a reasonable hypothesis to say that implies that there may be more roundness than us.
How many G's did you pull on the way up?
So the way up is about 3, which is not bad. And you're on your back. Even on the way down, when you pull 5, you pull it for like 2 seconds. Like you definitely 5 Gs, you feel it. But again, you're on your back, which is the easiest way to do something like that. And it's like, if you the analogy that crew member number 7, this amazing person, Sarah Knights, who trained us all. The analogy she gave us is, if you throw a rock at a lake, the rock hits the top and moves quickly, and then starts to settle slowly to the bottom. Right? Okay. You're in the rock, and the lake is the atmosphere. And
interesting.
So that first moment of deceleration is the 5 Gs. It happens very quickly, and then it's much more gentle.
It's interesting you say that, because a lot of folks seem to forget, right, that the atmosphere has mass. I mean, it's a liquid essentially. I mean, we know it's a gas, but you hit it. It's like, because did they ever do the oobleck experiments at Fieldston?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, so it's like, folks, if you make a cornstarch slurry, I'm going to have my hand out here, and it's a cornstarch slurry, oobleck, like the Dr. Seuss thing, and the harder you hit it, the more tough it is. But if you sink into it, it just goes. But
it just goes. And so the atmosphere starts very thin. And so you get this sense, now you're back strapped into your seat. And I guess at some point we should talk about the top, but
sure.
You're strapped to your seat, and you get that whole movie that I was just describing in reverse. And the sense of speed as the wind noise is going past this capsule. It wasn't scary speed, it was exciting speed.
Sure.
And then the parachutes come out, and you gently float down. Actually, here's an emotionally interesting thing that happened to all of us, I think. We hear from Capcom, so the people, the person on the ground who talks to everybody in the capsule. There's a wonderful Navy test pilot, the total, can I say badass on your show? Is total badass.
Of course, yes, you can.
So Kevin says to us that the capsule, the booster is successfely down, and the booster is a robot, right?
Yeah.
It's a robotic spaceship, and we're like, yes, like this was part of our team that got us to space.
Absolutely,
like,
sure.
We're very attached to the automated part of this thing. I don't know what that says about science fiction and C-3PO and R2-D2, but I felt a little bit of that.
Yeah, no, I get that. And you were about to say something about the top of the capsule. Talk about that.
Oh, so it was really awesome. I mean, and that was the part that I at least had my plan in my head for. And I'm in microgravity, so I've got to do something that's not just sitting in my chair at the window. So I think there's some of it on actually some of the Blue Origin videos online. I kind of turn myself upside down or orient myself upside down to Earth. And I think there's this one moment that that I think will haunt me forever. Like it was the ultimate piece of this, where it was just the emptiness and vast blackness of space. And I think it's my mind playing tricks on me, but I feel like the blue and the white and the yellow and brown and green of Earth, I think those colors were more vivid than I've ever seen them before.
They probably were.
And it was just hanging above me with this tiny little line which represents the atmosphere. And you know what, again, it's like forget about the politics of why it happens or who's at fault. But when you see the atmosphere that small and you realize how little of it there is, you go, wow, we really need to make sure we do a good job taking care of this thing.
Yeah. Like, otherwise, it's like Spaceballs, where someone's going to come in and suck it all out. Yeah, I
right. I mean, and so it was this very visceral moment. I think it was really nice to have actually Bill as part of our crew, because Chris is an engineer and Audrey actually is an attorney by training, but spends her life in engineering and operations. And I think about science all the time. Having somebody who thinks about emotion and the expression of it professionally was such a wonderful thing. And I think, if people haven't heard Bill talk about it, he really expresses that feeling of welcoming and safety that you felt that moment.
My dad and I talked about this yesterday in the car, and about how, because I told him how you and I were going to be chatting, and we were just sort of talking about this, and he says, it's very clear, Shatner's emotional state after he got off, he was clearly very moved by all of this. Yeah. Have you talked to him, or do you trading emails with him?
Yeah. I mean, we are all, connected and friends now. And actually, I'll tell you, so Bill had this idea that we have this moment at the top of our flight. And as we were under the mains, Chris suggested that we have another moment as a group before we got off. And Jeff Bezos comes and opens up the capsule and welcomes us back to Earth. And we unstrap and we did this like group hug. And I mean, we're all crying. I mean, it was just to be able to get this different perspective.
Sure.
Honestly, like we were talking about gravity before, like the human body, right, is set up to function in 1G.
Yeah.
I'm not sure the human brain set up to see that distance and to see those angles and to get that perspective. It's going to be something that we're going to learn. And I feel like I've got a sense of, an actually a really interesting sense of that quick 10 minutes of zooming out, seeing it and zooming back. And I can't even imagine if you've been on the International Space Station for a couple months, like,
sure,
but you hear astronauts struggling with being articulate about how you feel differently about the overview effect. And I get it now. It's just, I think people need to see it, and I want people to see it.
Let's talk about, before we, because I want to talk to you about Dassault Systems and Medidata and Carnegie Mellon and entrepreneurship in a second. But you get back, the first night, I mean, I don't know if you were staying in a hotel down there or when you got home. I mean, are there those moments that first night and after where you say, holy cow, I've been into space?
It's still happening.
Yeah. Okay. I'm sure.
Yeah. And again, it's been a week and change, a couple of weeks now. And I think it's still settling in, and I'm not sure if it's ever going to fully settle in. And I don't mean that in a bad way. It's why I get so excited now. I thought I'd be excited about it, and now I'm even more excited about it. I just think you get these data points that are unexpected. And I can tell you a quick data story.
Please, of course.
I just think
actually, it's a good segue into talking about metadata, but you go ahead.
Okay, actually, truly it is, because I'm very a quantitative guy, like statistics. I work in statistically showing that therapies are safe and effective for people. Yeah. And I will admit that I, in my life, had been pretty dismissive of people who do qualitative research until a qualitative researcher said this to me. And they said, well, you can look at a distribution of human intelligence, and you can tell me what the average is and what a standard deviation is. And you can sit there with your formulas and you know a lot. But if I give you the one qualitative research data point that there was somebody as smart as Albert Einstein, knowing that that point is somewhere on that curve tells you something about the nature of human intelligence that your zoomed out statistical view, you wouldn't know.
Sure.
Going to space has given me these data points that I just didn't realize existed in terms of how I think about the individuals around me, people as a civilization, the planet, even how I think about technology, even how I think about things like water and food.
Sure.
It just has changed me. I don't know how else to say it.
No, you see the world. Yeah, no, but you're seeing the world through new eyes. And there's a, and it's good because, you think about this, right? It's not just about paying money to have this experience, right? But it is paying money to have an experience that totally, I'm not going to say totally changes your outlook, but completely refreshes your outlook. It's one of those things where it is fundamentally money well spent. And not that I want to talk to you about the cost, but that's exactly
100% worth it. And it's also, as one of the early people doing it, it's spending money so it will get cheaper and scale. And so more people can do it, right? And that's exciting to me.
Okay. I want to ask you an engineering question before we get to metadata, because one thing that I keep wrapping my head around is the concept of the space elevator.
Yeah.
Right. Which is this idea that you have platforms that are connected by a very long, essentially a very long string. You take an elevator up. I try to wrap my head around how this works, because I don't understand why they don't fall down, why they don't spin off into space, why they don't get ripped. Not that we have them, but it just seems to be because, right, this is the thing that will reduce the cost of getting into space, because you'll just be able to take an elevator up. But talk about this.
If we could ever build one.
Yes, if we could build
one.
I'm
not an aerospace engineer, I'm a biology guy, but to at least my engineering layman's understanding, that's exactly, the idea is right. Think about it as like a ball on a string.
Exactly. Yes.
And Earth is swinging that string around, but we need to develop some very strong strings to do that.
Yes.
Which I don't really think that. Again, maybe there's people who are building them right now, but you certainly can't go to Home Depot and get one of those right now.
We're talking about, this is what we're talking about, innovation and nanotechnology. And
look, that's an interesting science fiction.
Yes.
That people talk about. And again, I just did the science fiction become science, so I'm not ruling that out by any stretch.
All right, this is why you and I need to keep having these conversations. So let's talk about this. You went to Carnegie Mellon. You're now on the board of trustees there. You love Carnegie Mellon as much as me and my family love William and Mary, which is a good thing to hear and understand. But you went, talk about this journey. My listeners love hearing about entrepreneurs and entrepreneurship. You were, and I will say this, I meant to say this before, you were ahead of the curve on this concept of big data. Data and data analysis is the hot industry now. You founded Medidata in 1999. Tell us about that.
So I do credit Carnegie Mellon for making me kind of who I am in a lot of ways. And it's a university that has a lot of really diverse capabilities that are accessible to students. So it's somewhere with a great theater program. And that was exciting to me because we did it together. We did a bunch of theater stuff in high school. And growing up in New York, that was an important part of my life. It's a university that has tremendous science programs, but also computer and engineering programs. And so I did biology. I actually thought I was going to do chemistry when I went to Carnegie Mellon. Okay. Inspired by lots of people at Fieldston, including the late Cheryl Snyder.
Cheryl Snyder, of course. Yeah.
And so I thought I was going to go doing chemistry. I got excited about biology, but I also was able to do some computer science on the side. And excuse me, just like Gabe Weiner, I had and JB, I had my Commodore 64. Those guys had apples. I always loved programming, and would always try to. My first reaction was program myself out of a problem, a fun problem or a school problem. And so I go through Carnegie Mellon. I've got my biology undergraduate degree. I think at this point, I'm going to get a graduate degree in biology and spend my life doing academic research.
Sure.
And I'm sitting at the Columbia Presbyterian Medical Center uptown doing prostate cancer research. And I have a refrigerator full of blood samples from patients who were from before they went into having their prostate removed, which is still not something that I would wish on anybody, but
sure. 20
years ago, it was a big deal surgery.
Absolutely.
And sometimes people would have the surgery and it would turn out they still had prostate cancer. And it was because you couldn't find the tiny little micrometastases or potential for micrometastases that was circulating through their blood. People are now doing this with circulating tumor cell assays and looking at sequencing individual cells. This was a very early kind of prescient idea along those lines. And so all the blood was behind me. The assays were on my lab bench in front of me. There was a shared Windows 95 PC in the back of the lab. So that dates it as well.
Sure.
And I had to literally get in an elevator to go to different buildings to get access to some of the hospital systems that I needed data from, to transcribe things from medical records. And I was sharing a lab bench with Ed Ikaguchi, who was a resident in the urology department at the time. And he was like me, somebody who thought about coding as a way to solve problems. And we started to compare notes. And it turns out that what was happening in academic research, as understaffed and underfunded as it might have been, was pretty much the same problem as what was happening in industry research.
Sure.
It was this problem of all these connections and all these possible places where errors could come in terms of transcribing and moving data around. And I used to always give this example. It doesn't have to do with the fact that I went up and, the rocket that Jeff Bezos's company created, but we would say to people in the 90s, if you can buy a book on Amazon, which I think was the only thing you could buy on Amazon then, like, why can we not use that infrastructure to run research projects? Sure. And we through a friend of ours at the hospital, met his college roommate who brought some business savvy and an investor perspective, having worked on investments, including not just technology, but also in the life sciences industry. Tariq Sharif, we met after work, and like literally 22 years later, wow, Tariq is like my best friend. We share an office that doesn't have a wall between our desks.
Nice.
And we created this Medidata thing. It really focused in the first kind of 10 years of the company on connecting the professionals, the doctors, the nurses, the statisticians. Then we realized, I literally remember listening to Steve Jobs, still alive, obviously, at the time, talking about iPhone sales, the same way Tim Cook today talks about, iPhone sales, but to get people to write apps.
Sure.
We heard that and we were like, oh, wow, the same way we connected all the professionals, we're gonna be able to connect all the patients.
Sure.
So then we started to put things in the phones in people's pockets so they could report their effects. And then what happened is we created, to your question kind of about big data, we created this system where so much research was being done. And again, I don't want this to come off with any like self-congratulatory persona, but like, because I have a lot left to do in my life too.
We're going to talk about that in a second.
But you have a 50-50 chance of getting a drug that's been approved in the last 10 years, and the data that was used to present to regulators around the world through Medidata. And we realized that with all that data, shouldn't we be able to do more interesting things? And because we have it all in one place. And what we started doing is looking at, can we take data from research project 1 and apply it to things that we're trying to figure out in research project 2?
Sure.
Can we take people who volunteered to be in a clinical trial and were given the standard of care? They were just given regular chemotherapy instead of some great new drug, because you need to have, or potentially great new drug, you need to have these two groups to compare them with. But can we not take those patients and use their data so we can avoid having patients to get the placebo or the standard of care in the next trial? Or can we stack data and help people discover things about diseases that they didn't know? We actually, one of my proudest collaborations over the years has been with a gentleman, David Fagenbaum, who runs this thing called the Castleman Disease Research Network. CDCN, the Collaborative Network. And it basically, we worked with him to take a rare disease, something that like 5,000 people get diagnosed with, and actually start to subtype it. So you could figure out, even with very small data, number of patients, what patient would benefit from what medicine.
Interesting.
And I just feel like this kind of big data world in healthcare is going to result in the science fiction of real precision medicine.
Sure.
I actually, for anybody interested, I did write a book about it. It's called The Patient Equation.
That was my next question, was going to be about the patient equation.
Yeah. So like, I think this is the future. This is science fiction becoming science fact in medicine.
I mean, we talk about innovation and we talk about these big problems. We're just talking about water and innovation and how that's going to help solve this. I mean, we as a nation globally, we are all struggling with this issue of how to provide healthcare to the most numbers of people in a way that doesn't bankrupt them. It doesn't bankrupt the government. It doesn't bankrupt. I'm not a big fan of the HMO model, but the point is, the only way we're going to be able to solve these problems is by having a better understanding. And the only way we're going to be able to drive innovation is by having access to better information. So that's what we're doing.
And whatever solution,
yeah.
whatever societal solution we come up with, doing a better job is going to help.
Yes.
And to me, that kind of precision medicine definition of give the right treatment to the right patient at the right time, as much of the time as you can, is about individual outcomes. And the way you figure out how to do that is by looking at populations.
Yes.
So, so when you are talking to me as my physician, you can say, well, Glenn, these are the people who were like you, and these are the things that worked for them and didn't work for them. And we're measuring the complete person, not just the person in the doctor's office, but how they think and how they behave. And I think that's the future of medicine.
Yeah, my wife is a physician. She's a family doc, and I think that this is the kind of thing that she would agree with you. In fact, I'm going to make sure after we get off of this, I'm going to go to Amazon and buy a copy of the patient equation for her.
All proceeds from the book go to Conquer Cancer, the ASCO Foundation. So.
That's excellent. All right, that's good to know. So what's next, man? I mean, you've had this life-changing experience. You're seeing the world through new eyes. Yeah. Is there a science fiction book in the offering talking about these? I mean, what's next for you? I know you are the I'm sorry, I'm going to get your title wrong, but you were acquired by Dassault Systems. You are now the
Vice Chair of Life Sciences and Healthcare.
Vice Chair of Life Sciences Healthcare at Dassault Systems.
Yeah. What's next for me is continuing to do the stuff that I do professionally. Again, I feel like we're in a super exciting time in life sciences. I've spent a lot of time, very much inclusive of Carnegie Mellon, Water.org, in terms of trying to really be an advocate for STEM. Again, not every single problem, but so many problems can be traced back to fundamental needs that people have around the world that science, technology, engineering, and math can help solve.
Yeah.
And I think the more people who get excited about it, who do it, the better. If I can use, it's kind of a negative example, but I know there weren't people involved, but we put a helicopter, a drone, humanity on Mars.
Yes.
And not 100% of Earth wasn't riveted in watching it, even though you could say close enough to that was watching when we put Neil Armstrong on the moon.
Absolutely, yeah.
People getting inspired and excited about innovation as a civilization is something that I really want to do my part to help catalyze. And so I'm taking all of this space stuff into what I do around STEM. That's the next big thing.
Love it. I love it. Hey, before I let you go, Joe Allgrant taking over as head of school at Fieldston.
I know, right? A biology professor.
Yes.
Yeah.
So when Joe was headmaster at Dwight Englewood, he had me come in and talk about politics and bridging gaps and all of that. I'm so enthusiastic that he's taking over.
He's an amazing teacher.
I am fairly certain, if you have not reach out to Joe. Because I'm fairly certain that they will have you speak at Fieldston all the time. I mean, they'll use it for as much as possible. Glen de Vries, we have to, I want to make it really clear. Follow Glen at Captain Clinical on Twitter. It's great to follow. Stick around for a second after I'm done recording, but thank you so very much for joining me today.
Thanks so much. It was really great to catch up with you.
Really appreciate it. And there we go. Stop recording.
Awesome.